Hello everyone, and thank you for attending today's Telestream Frost & Sullivan webinar on OTT monitoring to maximize the return on your streaming investments. I'm Robert Cabin, Digital Media Analyst at Frost & Sullivan. Joining me today is Stuart Newton, Vice President of Strategy and Business Development at Telestream. Our agenda today will be discussing OTT monitoring overview and challenges. I'll be discussing that. Stuart will take over to discuss maximizing the return on your streaming investments and Telestream's OTT monitoring solutions. I'll then discuss Telestream's OTT monitoring award, and then we'll take questions and answers. Just a little quick background. I've been a digital media analyst for about 10 years at Frost & Sullivan and an engineer about 10 years before that. Stuart, if you'd like to give some background here.
Sure, thanks, Robert. So I'm in the corporate development group at Telestream, as Robert said earlier. I work on a lot of strategy and business development around the IT solutions, and I've been working on the monitoring solutions for the last 13 years.
Great, thanks, Stuart. So I'd like to start by discussing the OTT monitoring overview and challenges, and just a little, quick background. Our digital media group, we're kind of canaries in the coal mine. I cut the cord 4 to 5 years ago. I've added live streaming about 2 years ago. I've tried just about every streaming service, hardware, software platform, diagnosed a lot of the things that a customer can control, ISPs, modems, routers, and settings, etc. And so we've looked at this, it's personal to us just as well. First, I'd like to discuss the need for OTT monitoring in the first place. So, the big need for OTT monitoring or monitoring OTT streaming is preventable churn. So, if you look at the preventable churn due to poor streaming video quality, we're estimating it costs video content providers nearly $1 billion a year in lost revenue. Now, some of that is going, not as an industry, but canceling one service, you're likely picking up another one, but someone is losing that revenue. And OTT monitoring really helps you diagnose where those problems occur to help keep customers from leaving. If you look at the stat on the right-hand side, so Nielsen estimated in their total audience report that about 17% of paid streaming video subscribers cancel because of quality. Now, there's estimates out there that 628 million subscribers to paid streaming video services. So we estimated at about $9 a month. That's 961 million, almost $1 billion in lost revenue just due to poor OTT streaming quality. Pay TV doesn't worry about a lot of this quality churn because of managed networks. Most of their churn they're worried about from either price or customer service issues. Quality isn't as much of an issue on the pay TV side, but we'd like to show here that it's a big and growing issue on the OTT streaming side. So just real fast here, I'd like to discuss the streaming media life cycle. There's a lot that goes into, getting a video playing on a device. Our digital media group likes to say we cover everything from creation to consumption. And there's a lot of parts to that, from capture and ingest to encoding, transcoding, playback. On the left side is a very simplified view, and Stuart will get into a much more detailed version of that later. But I'd just like to point out just how many steps are involved in, getting a video playing on a device. You can see, the CDNs in the middle, all the different devices on the right-hand side. And, when you consider, say 200, over 200 streaming services, say 12 major CDNs, another dozen or so major ISPs, then the number of TVs out there, the types of smartphones and tablets. I wanted to ask Stuart, how many, do you have a sense of how many permutations of kind of unmanaged networks and viewing devices are out there that Telestream monitors for OTT?
Yeah, I would say certainly thousands, if not 10,000s of different permutations. Part of the challenge with this is that no two CDNs are the same, no two ISPs are the same, no two cloud providers are the same. So the permutations are just increasing exponentially at the moment, and I think this is only going to compound as we go forward into the next generation video delivery architectures.
Great, thanks. So the big problem with all this, we like to say, is managed versus unmanaged networks. You know, on the pay TV side, everything is managed. The networks, all the devices that they put on there are rigorously tested. So on the pay TV side, you don't have quite as much of an issue with this. On the OTT streaming side, it's really about the unmanaged networks are the big challenge for streaming services, and kind of the root cause. You know, can often be misattributed to the wrong part of the distribution network. You know, there's a lot of things the customers can control. There's a lot of things on the infrastructure side that are kind of out of the customer's control, be it a CDN or the ISP. You know, I myself, as we were going through this research, I had this exact issue myself. I, switched out routers. I already had a highly rated modem. My ISP came out and adjusted signal levels. And, still had issues with these things. My dad was a network engineer for, most of his career and helped me, troubleshoot some things, and ended up, switching streaming services myself just because, everything that I could control was fixed and was still having issues, switched to a different streaming service, and everything got better after that. So I just want to give a sense of broadcast and pay TV quality benefit from really tightly controlled networks, but OTT is really done over unmanaged internet and has a lot of potential streaming devices from tablets, smartphones, and smart TVs. I'd like to discuss a little bit about the research that kind of went into this. And just to kind of step back a little bit, this is really, like I mentioned, the part of the streaming process that customers can't control, sort of the CDNs, ISPs, actually even before the ISPs. It was kind of a gap we saw in the market on research-wise. A lot of companies focused in on the quality of experience, kind of what viewers saw at the player, but we wanted to focus on the infrastructure side, and that's how that's what led to all this research. So the OTT monitoring market itself, we saw growing from 62 million in 2018 to almost 150 million in 2024 at a compound annual growth rate of almost 16%. And again, this is for the infrastructure side of the OTT monitoring and compliance market. And on this, you can see a lot of the drivers to that growth, whether, end-to-end monitoring is becoming increasingly important. There's really no way to do this without monitoring the entire network end-to-end. There's a big transition going on to multi-screen and away from pay TV. A lot of companies are going to software as a service platforms. A lot of the flexible pricing models, particularly that Telestream has, to avoid capital expenditures. There's a huge transition to direct-to-consumer OTT services. You see all the major providers out there launching their own services, and there's just a big increase in media streaming device options and services out there. So that's kind of covering the market size and growth. And then from this point, I think we'd like to introduce a poll question. So the poll question number 1, do you believe your revenue could be improved through additional monitoring and operational visibility? Number 1, definitely. We have a lot of issues with video delivery. 2 is yes, we have regular issues with video delivery. 3 is yes, but only occasional issues. And number 4 is no, we are happy with our video delivery. So there should be a poll question pop up on your platform. There we go. And then you can click on one of these, hit submit, and we should get some results from there. Okay, we're just waiting for a few more results, and then we'll go on to the next slide with the results. Okay, let me switch to the poll results slide, see what's come in so far. Okay, great. So I know not great for everyone on the call, but 15% are definitely having issues with video delivery. Almost 20% are having regular issues, and huge, almost 60% still have occasional issues. So that's good for the OTT monitoring and compliance market. So thank you all for participating in that poll. And next we'll go on to Stuart to discuss maximizing the return on your streaming investment.
Okay, thanks, Robert. So what we're going to do now is take a look at the challenges around video delivery and really why it's so difficult. So many of you will have seen the high-profile news articles and about issues with video delivery over the last few years. I mean, these are just the ones that are high profile enough to actually make the news. But there's an awful lot more in the background. In fact, magnitudes more in the background that are there every single day and causing issues for customers that are affecting churn, as Robert discussed earlier. If you actually, here's a few more statistics from a different report that we used last year. The interesting thing here is that it's a different perspective from the statistics that Robert was using. The one that Robert used said that I think it was 17 or 19%, but this one says 27%. It's a different profile against a different audience. But the key thing about all of these stats is that they're significant. They're all very significant. Every report that we see says that there's a significant percentage of people that are less likely to return if they get issues. They'll go to a competitor. They'll never come back. But the really key thing out of all this is that 4 out of 5 people will not tell you they're having issues. They will just leave. There's always people that will complain and be very happy to complain, but many people don't like complaining, and they will just leave. And they're the hidden group of people that you really need to be looking out for. So you need to make sure your video delivery is good from the outset. So if we look at a kind of a view of the video delivery landscape out there today, this is not to scale because there are many video delivery head ends, and we'll walk through this architecture in a second. As you go out into the content delivery networks and the core delivery networks in the middle of this diagram going from left to right, these obviously expand massively, nationally, globally, and then as you move out to the edge, when you've got the mobile operators, the Wi-Fi cloud providers, the access network providers for DSL or cable or telcos, whatever it is, these are huge amounts of companies with huge networks. So this is more like a tree structure going out to the right hand side, but this is just represented here so you can see the flow of video as it goes across these different parts in the network. So if we look at the origin of video over IP, which was used for the original cable video and IPTV deliveries, where that was mainly transport stream. What would happen there is the video would come in from the live feeds into content preparation, what's called a video head end, which is the end of that arrow that's there. The video would be processed into transport streams, and it would be delivered down through a core network out to the edge of the network, and then down your DSL cable or your fiber or your RF cable to your home. This is a fully managed network, as Robert said, so this is very much controlled. With the advent of adaptive video delivery and OTT, people started delivering video in a different way. So they go through an encode package path that puts the video into the adaptive domain, which is HTTP based. That is sent out across, for example, going across through a third-party CDN here. Many of you will know the big content delivery networks out in the world that can deliver nationally or globally. So those streams would go out across those networks as HTTP feeds and down to the end customers, either back in the home watching over their Wi-Fi network, out watching over a cellular network, or via a Wi-Fi cloud or some other access network like that. Then we have the telcos and the cable providers who decided that they also wanted to deliver OTT feeds. They sent their feeds out across CDNs as well. In the middle there, you will see a CDN. That's an operator-owned CDN, so that would be their own CDN. So that was a controlled network. But many operators also use their own CDN, but also use third-party CDN. So depending on the type of device you're watching on or the different application that you're using, you may be using a completely different CDN. So when you're watching on a smart TV in the home and then you walk outside to watch on a cellular network, the same program, it may be coming via a completely different path. So this is a massive mesh and tangle of different delivery architectures and different companies. The top line here for IPTV and cable was always a very controlled network. The same company control the video head end, the core network, the edge devices, whether they're DSLAMs or EdgeComs, and then the last mile into your home. For adaptive video delivery for OTT, for example, it could come across many different companies. A different company controls the video head end, a different one controls the CDN part of the network, and many other companies control the access networks. So what happens here is we get lots of silos and finger pointing. It's much more difficult. It's a lot more difficult to monitor the video end to end if you don't control the parts of the network, all parts of the network, and we get a lot of finger pointing. And we see this all the time. So you can't get the stream properly downstream of the CDN. You go to the CDN provider, say, I can't get my stream downstream of the CDN. They say, well, we believe our CD is operating properly. It must be an issue with what you're sending into the CDN, and you've got to try and figure this out. And this happens on a daily basis all over the world. We also have constant change happening. So there's new formats, new loads on the CDNs, new architectures, new protocols, whether it's the move from 4K to HK, whether it's the move to HDR, Dolby Atmos, Dolby Vision, whether we're moving from some of the legacy adaptive streaming architectures like smooth streaming HDS, moving to HLS dash, or some of the new low latency adaptive streaming formats that are out there today. This is constant change. The resolutions are adding to the load. The different adaptive protocols are trying to get lower and lower latency, so the packets are getting smaller and the timing is getting tighter. And this is constantly changing. And all of this, as you can well imagine, leads on to buffering issues, unhappy customers, churn, customer receive really poor service, brands are damaged, and revenue can be lost. It's not easy to do this. The people delivering video to you today across all of these different networks have a tough job, but there are ways that we can mitigate this. And the way you do this is to enable yourself to maximize the return on the valuable assets that you've created. People spend a lot of money producing video content or buying video content, and they need to make sure they can deliver it. There's no point in spending millions getting access to video content if you fall at the first hurdle of being able to deliver that to the customers that are paying for it. So the first thing you need to do is stop the finger pointing and rapidly identify the root cause. Where is it going wrong in the network? You need to receive early warning of head-end core network or access network issues. You don't want the people leaving. You want to get early warning that something's going wrong. Something's getting blocked. Something's getting congested. The video hasn't been encoded properly at the head end. Where is it going wrong? There are thousands of ways that the video can be affected in that end-to-end chain. You really need to know what's going on as soon as possible. Nowadays, with the massive breadth of video delivery as well, you want to have the flexibility to monitor what you control and what you don't. You also want cost-efficient monitoring that can be tuned to the value of the content. So if you do control the network, you can put probes in it. If you don't control the network, then what you typically do is you monitor in front of that part of the network and behind that part of the network and connect those monitoring points back to a central monitoring dashboard that you can see what's going on. But either way, you need to know what's going in and what's coming out. Otherwise, if you say what's coming out is wrong, they're not working, and you complain, that the person that controls that part of the network may say, well, it's just what you're sending me on the front end. So you need to control what you need to be able to monitor what you do control and what you don't. And with the cost-efficient monitoring, you can tune the monitoring to the value of the assets. So if you've got assets that are incredibly valuable, like channels that people watch all the time, or live sports events that you want to monitor, you can really focus the monitoring in on them, and then you can use scheduled monitoring to go around assets maybe that you just want to check on an hourly basis to make sure they're still available, but not so many people are watching them or they're lower value assets. And lastly, you want to leverage scalable solutions with multiple deployment options. We're going to talk about this a bit more coming up, but you want to be able to move from appliance-based architectures to virtual architectures to cloud-based architectures. You need to be able to scale probes from small to large across all these different ways of deploying these video networks. Robert, did I miss anything there, or can you think of anything else? It always astonishes me that people can spend so much money, millions and millions of dollars, on the assets, and then put so much effort into getting the assets right all the way down to where they start delivering, and then kind of fall over at the last hurdle effectively. Any thoughts from your side on this from the research you did?
Stuart, I think you highlighted the problem extremely well. It amazes us because we cover a lot of that content production as well, and so when you look at the billions of dollars spent yearly by the streaming content providers, and it floors us too that when you get down to this final endpoint of a customer actually viewing it, that you can not spend that kind of time and effort on getting that streaming quality right. So I think so many of them are not as concerned about it as they should be, and that's why we're trying to kind of raise awareness with all this kind of research that streaming quality is as much of an issue, or you should be paying as much attention to that as you are into putting the money into the content production in the first place.
Yeah. Okay. Well, what we'll do now is move on to how we do this. We've talked about what you need to be doing to be able to get a maximum return on your assets. What we'll do now is we'll look at actually how you do that from a more pragmatic perspective. So using the same architecture diagram again, these are all the different monitoring points that you can look at when you're looking at video delivery. So there's a bit of color coding on here, just to highlight the different areas. So when you're getting feeds in from live cameras, for example, it may be transport streams, which are the green arrows on here. And as you can see, if it's transport streams, the green arrows will go all the way down that top line, all the way down across the cable video networks and IPTV networks, right down to your set-top box. The blue on the left-hand side here is just to represent the fact that Telestream recently acquired Tektronix Video Group, and we now have all of the SDI and the latest 2110 monitoring technology as well for looking at the actual feeds coming out of the camera, so you can tune them to make sure all the camera feeds are balanced and everything's good, or you can use all the same capabilities in post-production to make sure the video quality is excellent before you start pushing it out into the network. So if we look at the transport stream side of this, again, this goes out and all the way down what we call the linear path, which is going down that top path across the traditional telecommunications IPTV and cable video networks. The purple arrows on here are to represent the adaptive streaming. You don't need to have all of these solutions in the network. You may not have all these parts of the network. You may only have the OTT part, in which case you choose the monitoring points that make the most sense for you. Wherever you've got the most pain, you can start there, and then you can work up. And as you put more and more of these monitoring points out in the network, you connect them back to a video management system, which is the bar in the middle there, the video quality assurance system, which allows you to bring in all this data and correlate it on an end-to-end basis. So we'll take a look at that now and exactly how we do that. So there's two types of monitoring points that we have. One is some are passive-based and some are active. The passive monitoring solutions are actually fundamentally looking on the wire. So we can use things like span or mirror ports on switches or optical taps, and you're actually looking at what is going on the wire itself and seeing all the data coming backwards and forwards between the different parts of the network. So, for example, if you put a passive monitoring probe after the origin server, as the data is going to and from the CDN, you'll be able to see all the interaction between the caching nodes and the origin servers and see all the interplay there, the timer characteristics, the loading characteristics, and everything else. But you need to see that live. There's no way, if you really want to get to the bottom of what's going on between the caching servers and the origin servers, the passive monitoring would be a way to do that. Active monitoring is used where you want to test to a particular point in the network. So you can think of active monitoring as putting a probe at a demarcation point between the elements in the network and testing to that point. Is my video available at this point? Can I pull, for example, the manifests? Can I get access to all of the bitrate variants that are listed in that manifest? Are the manifests and the adaptive video chunks coming out in a timely fashion? All these kind of capabilities where you actually want to test, do a demarcation test to that point in the network. And this is incredibly useful to determine where your issues are originating in the network. Lastly, on the architecture side, we need to look at the flexibility and scaling of the solutions. In the past, we tended to use, globally, people tended to use appliance-based probes. And what's been really important over the last few years is to move the capabilities of these probes into virtualized and cloud-based architectures. So we've done an awful lot of work to make sure that all of the IQ probes can be used both actively and passively, as we discussed, as appliances in the cloud or virtualized. And we've also added in a huge amount of APIs into all of the probes and management systems so they can integrate with third-party management solutions, OSS, BSS systems as well. So if we just take a look at the probes and what we're actually monitoring at each point in the network, just to give you an overview, there's a lot more depth to this, and feel free to contact us or come and see us at one of the shows such as NAB, and we can give you a lot more depth in what we're looking at here. But fundamentally, what you're looking at the content preparation point at the video head end is you want to look at the transport streams pre and post encode. You want to make sure that the QoS part of that is good. So all the packets are getting to where they need to be. There's not too much jitter on the wire, burstiness of the packets. Everything's good from a transport perspective. Are the packets getting to where they need to be in a timely fashion? But you also want to decode the video and look at the what we call the quality of content or the quality of experience. And that is actually decoding the video, looking for black screen, freeze frame, looking at the picture quality, looking at audio levels, audio loudness, compliance issues, everything that you can think of that you may want to check before you send that video, put that video back into packets and send it out down the pipe. And this is where you would check for the SCT35 ad marker insertions, and then you can track those down the wire as well. So there's many, many things that you can do at this point in the network to make sure that the video you prepared is absolutely correct, good quality, and ready to go out in the packets and down the pipe. Now, in a linear transport stream network, you would then put those networks back into the packets as MPEG transport streams, and you would send them out over IP all the way down the wire down to the set-top boxes. And really, what you're doing is once you put the video back into, compressed it, and put it back into the packets and sent it out, you're really looking for IP problems, packet loss issues that may cause MPEG packet loss or buffering down at the down at the TV screen, blockiness on the screen caused by lost packets, that kind of thing. So you're not checking the actual quality of the video itself further down the pipe. You're checking that the transport is good. When you move to the adaptive domain as well, you do exactly the same thing, but in the adaptive space, instead of having a single bitrate transport stream, you take in the transport stream into the encoder and you create multiple bitrate versions of it. This is why if you're watching on a device and you start the video and the quality is quite low, and then suddenly it snaps into better quality, that's because for adaptive streaming and OTT, you generate multiple bitrate variants that are different quality versions of the same video. And if your end device can't stream the high quality version because it doesn't have enough bandwidth to download it, it can switch to a lower grade version and start the video off with that lower grade quality of the video, and then step up when it gets more bandwidth. And all of you will have seen that step up, and your picture suddenly goes clear when it's decided it's got enough bandwidth and it can step up. So again, for the adaptive streaming and the OTT world, we decode the video and we look at all the quality before it goes out into the network. But we have to do that for each of those bitrate variants, make sure all 6, 7, or 8 bitrate profiles of that video content is good before it's packaged up and sent out into the network. For adaptive streaming, you then package up the video into chunks, whether that's HLS or Dash or one of the new low latency formats, and you then push those chunks from the packager out to the origin server. And what you want to do there is make sure that all the instruction files or the manifests for what is available and all the chunks of video are pushed correctly out to the origin server. So you may want to monitor there, which is called publishing monitoring, and that's where the video is pushed out. The instruction files or the manifests and the actual chunks are pushed out for all of those bitrate variants. And bear in mind that at this point, you may have 7 bitrate variants, but you may also be producing HLS and Dash for different types of devices. So you started off with one transport stream coming into the encoder, and you've now got 14 different variants of that going out to the origin server as chunk video. It soon multiplies when you start increasing the channel count. After that, you're looking at post-origin, and there's 2 ways of doing this. You can actually do passive monitoring here, where you're looking at the interaction between the caching servers and the origin servers, or you can do active testing, where you would put one of the demarcation active test probes after the origin, and you would say, you would join a URL and say, send me request a manifest for a particular URL, and then you can request all of the bitrate variants. Now, because this is demarcation testing, you can think of it acting like a synthetic client, but whereas a client would step up and down in bitrate as it got more bandwidth, a synthetic client probe can request all bitrate variants simultaneously. So if you put a probe PostOrigin and you request the OTT live stream, you can actually pull all 7 bitrate or all 6 or all 7 bitrate variants simultaneously. So you're checking that the manifest's good, and then all of the different video bit rates are available for that particular live stream. We also have the ability to be able to schedule this. So again, as I said earlier, if you have really valuable assets, you may want to check all the bitrate variants simultaneously all the time. If you have lower value assets or long tail video on demand content, you may want to just poll them once an hour or once a day, or you may want to just check that you can get to the manifest and the first few chunks of the video. It's very scalable, very tunable, so you can actually apply the monitoring in a way that makes sense to tune it to the value of your assets. If you have an origin server at the content preparation point, further back up the chain, as it shows in the content preparation blocks there, the reason you may have an origin server there is if you are using multiple CDNs. What people tend to do is the packager pushes to an origin at the video head end, and then multiple CDNs can pull from that origin. If you're in the situation where you're just using one CDN provider, you may push directly from the packager straight out to the CDN and then monitor at the point shown. But this monitoring can also be used just after the origin service shown in the video head end as well. As you go further out into the network and you're downstream of the CDN, it is possible to do passive monitoring at this point where you're looking at what's on the wire. But as I said earlier, this is massive scale. So trying to put optical taps or mirror ports into switches to monitor everything that's coming out of the other downstream side of the CDN may not be practical. So what you do at this point is you use active test probes, and this is where you can put active test probes on premise. You can put them in the cloud. You can put them globally in different cloud locations. We've just launched a new optic monitor service, which literally allows you to deploy cloud-based monitoring across all the public cloud providers at the click of a button. You literally put your URL in, and you click on a drop-down list or a map, say I'd like to monitor all of these different cloud locations across Azure, AWS, and Google Cloud, and you can pick and choose which locations you want to monitor, press start, and it will not only create the probes for you, it'll download all the URLs for monitoring, and it'll start monitoring and reporting back to you the health of those streams. And the reason you want to do this is you want to make sure that if you've gone to all the trouble of preparing the video at the video head end, and then you're pushing it out into the network, you must make sure that the video is available on the other side of the CDN. You can access all the bitrate variants and the manifests, and you can get that video in a timely fashion. If you are looking at end-to-end video, and true end-to-end video, then you may also want to bring the client analytics into it. This is a different perspective on the OTT path, so I showed on the other diagram. It's end-to-end, so again, we're going encoder, packager, origin, across the CDN and out to the edge. But in this case, what we've done is work with some of the leading client analytics vendors to be able to exchange data. So if you get a major head end or a major network issue, we have the ability to dip into the end client analytics systems and pull some of that data across to show you which users were affected. And some of the end client analytics vendors, like Nice People at Work, have actually added in the ability to be able to pull data across from the video management system back into the Ubora system to be able to do cross-referencing that way as well. So this is relatively new, but it's actually a great way of bridging the data silos between the end client analytics system and the video management system, and we'd be happy to show you this in more detail if you're interested. So the last thing on this part is just to mention what's coming down the line. I mean, a lot of the work that's been done on all of these video delivery architectures to date has been on-premise, and some of it has been in the cloud, and of course the CDNs are global anyway. But there's a huge amount of work to move towards, to move the content preparation into the cloud as well. We're going to have live mixed with live capture and remote edit. People are going to be using AWS, Azure, Google, other cloud providers. We also have ST2110 standard coming in on the front end, which is this massive move of SDI to IP-based compressed video contribution. So there's going to be a lot of work around that and a lot more complexity around that. And then when you start embracing cloud workflows, you need secure, reliable ways of getting the data to those points in the cloud. And this is where we start getting solutions like SRTs, ICSI solutions, and of course the new SRT hub solution from Haivision. And we're going to be talking about a lot of these at NAB as well. If you'd like to talk to us and you're not attending NAB, please feel free to contact us. Robert.
Great, thanks, Stuart. Now I'd like to talk about the 2019 Market Leadership Award for OTT Monitoring and Compliance that we awarded to Telestream. And I'd like to back up a little bit and to discuss the research first. So we conducted this research in about mid-2019 as part of our yearly production plan, completely independent of Telestream. And we take a bottom-up approach to our research. We estimate the different revenues out there for the OTT monitoring and compliance market. Then we talk to the vendors involved. You can see on this competitive landscape many of the vendors involved. We talk to them about the drivers and restraints and compile all that into a forecast. As I mentioned before, in 2018, that was the last full year of data available when we conducted the research. It was a $62 million market going up to almost 150 in our forecast for 2024 at a compound annual growth rate of almost 16%. So when we talked to all these companies, we found out what all the decision makers are thinking about the market, and then I'll have some key takeaways to discuss from there. Looking at this, if you look at the key takeaway on the slide, that since 1998, Telestream has been providing leading innovation in the digital video industry. Now, when we conducted this, this was just prior to the acquisition of Tektronix. This was kind of in April 2019. Telestream had a 2018 market share for OTT monitoring at about 21%. But when you combined it with Tektronix, Telestream achieved a 2019 OTT monitoring market share of almost, actually just over 37%, which was nearly triple that of its next largest competitor. So with that acquisition, Telestream, their IQ solutions in particular, really extended their lead in the OTT monitoring market. And so the key takeaways from that research, when we discussed with all the vendors in the market, was that OTT is rapidly becoming a high priority investment for media companies. Consumers out there will eventually expect broadcast and pay TV quality as kind of content consolidates, and there's less need for consumers to switch streaming providers. We like to say that early adopters will put up with glitches, but the more mainstream customers will just expect it to work. So I think this problem is only going to increase over time. And companies like Telestream really need to highlight the big value proposition of providing high-quality monitoring solutions to reduce what we call vulnerable churn, the churn that is completely preventable due to quality issues. Customers are going to change providers based on content or prices increasing. All that is kind of out of the control of the quality issue, but that's something that Telestream and companies like them can help you determine where these problems are occurring to prevent that vulnerable churn. And when you think about the amount of money being spent on content, why ruin that with poor streaming quality? And the last kind of takeaway for the research itself was that providers like Telestream are going to need to supply more options for early assistance and flexible payment options to potential customers to become their preferred OTT monitoring deployment vendor. This was more of a business case where, a lot of companies were, a lot of content providers out there were beginning trials and doing test runs of providing their direct-to-consumer streaming services. So they kind of needed some help and flexible payment options early on before they even got to deployment. And, and Telestream was fantastic about that and with their IQ solutions. So those were the key takeaways from the research. I think we're now getting into the Q&A section. So thank you all very much for being with us for this OTT monitoring webinar. And I think we'll look to the chat box and for questions here.
Rob, but while you're just doing that, can I just let everybody know that if you go to www.telestream.net/NAB, you'll find a site there where you'll be able to contact us and book meetings for NAB. So if anybody's interested in learning more about this, either hearing more about this or just come and talk to us about the kind of issues that you're facing, because we've been doing this for many years, and we've seen vast quantities of different issues that are raised between companies, within companies. We've seen so much of it, but we've always got more to learn. So if you've got issues that you can't isolate and things that keep cropping up that are causing you a headache, please come and talk to us. Let us know what they are, and we'll see what we can do for you.
Great. Thanks, Stuart. So we had one question early on while we're waiting for some others to come in. On our first poll question, the majority of listeners out there mentioned that they're having issues with their video delivery. And, as I mentioned, given that early adopters are, typically more forgiving of glitches, and, more mainstream customers are switching to streaming, I'd kind of like to ask all the participants out there, when you expect quality issues to impact your business. Do you see it in the next 6 months, the next year, the next 2 years, or do you not see it as much of an issue? But, to everyone listening out there, I guess I'd like to hear back, on when you think these quality issues for streaming are impacting your business in the next 6 months, year, 2 years, or do you think it's not going to be an issue? Let's see here. So we did have a question come in. This one's more for Stuart. We had a question come in about which customers are using Telestream's OTT monitoring.
That's a good question. It might be more of a question of who's not using Telestream's OTT monitoring, actually. We've been doing this for a long time. We were the first ones to produce video over IP probes for monitoring the original telco and cable video over IP networks in 2008. 2008-9, we started looking at the first OTT solutions, and we've just gone on from there. So many customers around the world, whether they're telecommunications customers, cable companies, content providers, CDN providers, OVPs, pretty much think of any of the big names. There's a good chance they're a customer of Telestream's at this point in time. I'd need to get a list of official customers I'm allowed to name and maybe get back to you on that, Mohammed. But there's vast quantities of them. And I think maybe, Robert, you can back that up as well, right, through your research. So.
Definitely. Yeah, when we looked at not only the vendors in the market, but we try to look at the end users as well. And the vast majority of customers out there were going with Telestream's IQ solutions for OTT monitoring. There's some transition from pay TV over to the OTT monitoring side, but when end users start doing this, it really is a completely different market. So the same solutions that applied there, I think we saw that some of them expected similar solutions or to be able to go with their providers from the pay TV side, but it's totally different, and it's something that they had to start from scratch on, basically, on the OTT monitoring side. And there wasn't a lot of carryover from the pay TV side that we saw. And really quickly, we did get a response about when it was going to be an issue from Peter. Thanks that it's an issue now and that broadcasters are aware. And then we just got another question in for Stuart about to tell us about the test appliance.
Test appliance. Might need more clarification on that one.
Pete, if you might want to elaborate on that. That's all the question has, is tell us about the test appliance.
I have another question here, Robert, actually.
Okay.
Actually, there's a couple of them. Do I need to have the management system if I only have a few probes? No. In fact, the probes are all, you can use the probes completely standalone. They all have their own user interfaces, so you can use the probes standalone. And many people do if they want to use them for point solutions or occasional troubleshooting. But the probes all have their own control configuration data extract APIs now. So you can connect them up to our management system or up to your own management system if you have a homegrown solution, or you can connect them up to more widely used systems like Skyline's data miner as well. So depending on the setup you have, some customers just go straight to the probes if they just have one or two. Others will connect them up to their own OSS systems. Others will connect them up to our video management system. Others will connect them to the systems like data miner. Some customers who have very large systems connect them up to the video management system, and they connect them up to Data Miner, and they use both of the systems. They'll go to the Data Miner system for looking at for getting an indication as to where things are going wrong, and then they'll dive down into the video management system to do a kind of deeper diagnosis of where the root cause is and get some early warning out of it and things like that. So the system's totally flexible. You know, it looks on the architecture diagram I did, it looks like there's a lot. It's a big system, but it could be just one of those monitoring points as a single probe, right up to, I think this biggest system we've got has got about 15 or 16 video management systems in it, which is thousands and thousands of probes. So, okay.
And there was an elaboration about the appliance, so that you said there was an appliance that went into physical locations.
Oh yes, okay. So so all of the probes are available as appliances, which is one U rack-based system, or you can have, or they're available as virtual machines, or we can provide instances that you can deploy in the cloud as well. So rather than you can use them as individual test probes, as they say, just by having a single one. And you can use that as an appliance, as a rack-mounted appliance. We also have some portable units. So there are portable versions of the probes that can be used down at the edge of the network. So if you want to do transport stream, multicast transport stream testing out at the edge of an IPTV or cable video network, you can do that. And we also have an adaptive active test probe that you can use in a portable way as well. So you can use that within the home, or over Wi-Fi connection to be able to test right out into the premises down at the edge if you want to do that for additional testing.
Great, thanks. And I will say that we did see a lot in the research in talking to end users as well, that the hardware side was still kind of a carryover from the pay TV mentality, and it's still warranted in many cases, but we saw so many end users migrating to the cloud and using these virtual instances that Stuart mentioned. And let's see, we have another question. Let's see, is there any case study which can be shared with clients to explain the benefits of monitoring?
Yes, we do have some case studies. Mohammed, I'll need to go and dig those out. But we can certainly follow up with you afterwards and get those over to you. There may be some, I haven't looked recently, there may be some on our website, but if not, we can certainly dig those out. So we'll take a note on that and get back to you.
Great, thank you. Let's see the next question we had. From a design perspective, how many probes versus number of caches in the network?
That's a very good question. So it depends what your budget is and how many assets you want to monitor on a regular basis. So if you've got 3 regions with if you've got a caching server in, say, 3 different regions, and you're just serving, say, a few thousand customers in each of those regions, then you could put a single probe out of each of those regions, and you could monitor the most valuable assets constantly, and then cycle around the other assets. If you can also have a single probe point to multiple cache locations, so you don't have to have a probe per cache. You can have a probe per region, and then you just make requests into the CDN, and that will go typically through a load balancer, and then the load balancer will decide which cache it throws it off to. So there's lots of data that we can monitor in the MIME headers and things like that we get back in the probe, so we can determine how that video was treated as you made your request and where it came back from. And there's a lot of different permutations. So if you have extremely valuable video assets that you're sending out to millions of customers, then we'd say put a good few probes in each of the regions where you're sending that video asset out to. If you've got valuable assets in one region and then not so valuable assets going to another region, you may want to have in the one region where there's valuable assets, you may want to do some 24/7 monitoring, but in the other regions, you may want to put probes out that just cycle through the assets. So it really depends on the value of the assets and what your budget is as to how many probes you use. You can monitor everything 24/7 if you want, but you're going to have the budget to cover that. So what we can do is work with you to figure out what makes sense. And we do this every day. Is we'll work with the customer. We'll work up to a certain budget, and we'll say, okay, we'll recommend you monitor these 20 assets permanently, and then cycle around with the other assets that are available. And these probes can monitor hundreds of assets simultaneously. So one probe will cover a lot of different points in the network.
Great, thanks, Stuart. I did want to mention, I think this was answered via the chat, but about the webinar being available for download, that you will receive a follow-up email in a few days to view the video on demand, and you'll use the same link that you used to join here. And there have been a couple more questions come in for Stuart. Are you monitoring on end devices directly as on mobile phones?
No, we're not monitoring on end devices directly, but that's where one of the leading client analytics vendors would come in. And if they're monitoring on the end devices and collecting the data back into their cloud collection system, then that's where we could have our video management system dovetail in with that and exchange data if we want to be able to do that. So I've got a question here, Robert. There's a good one. Where would you, actually this is a very good one. Where would you recommend starting with monitoring an OTT service if I have limited budget? So following on from the question before last, typically what we say to people is when if you own the transcoding at the video head end, and then that's really where you should be monitoring, especially if they're very valuable assets, which the most valuable assets, certainly you should be monitoring 24/7. Ideally, you monitor all the video assets that you're transcoding at the video head end. So pre-post encoder, if you can put one of the QoE QoS probes there, monitor everything that's going on, you will know that video is good before you start putting it into packets to send out in the network. After that, what we would recommend doing is if you have an origin at the video head end, you put an active test probe there and you monitor what's going on there, and then you put you scatter a few active test probes on the other side of the CDN and you test there. So if there's an issue on the other side of the CDN, a downstream side of the CDN, you can then look at your active test probe that's looking at the origin, and if that's okay, you can be fairly sure it's an issue within the CDN itself or within that particular region that the probe's complaining about. But really what we'd say is definitely monitor QoS, QoE at the video head end if you're doing the transcoding, then do active testing post-origin, active testing post-CDN. If you then discover chronic issues that you need to do a deeper dive on, then you can start engaging the passive monitoring probes and starting looking at what's going on the wire. And we found a lot of issues with load balancing, caching servers not caching content for long enough. They keep requesting the same content. We've also had situations where an end client hadn't been updated properly and it was requesting assets from the CDN. The CDN was sending that request back to the origin server, and the origin server no longer had that asset because the client hadn't been updated to basically let it know that asset wasn't available anymore. So this was an issue that we could track through passive monitoring to see that the CDN was requesting assets that didn't even exist on the origin server because the end client hadn't been updated properly. So just because, and this is a key thing with monitoring, is that where you're seeing the issue isn't necessarily where the issue is originating, right? This was an issue with the client updates that was causing additional load on the origin servers, where there were requests for an asset that it no longer had because that asset had already been taken away. So this is where passive monitoring can really come in to find the chronic issues. And in most cases, actually, when we put a passive probe on a network to look at what's really going on the wire, you'll find things that you never expected. People often put it on to look for a particular issue and then find 4 other issues that they had no idea was even happening. Load balancing issues across the origin servers, that kind of thing. Response issues through load balances. The CDN's requesting something, and it's taken way too long to get to the origin server and back again, and it's introducing unnecessary delays in the network. So back to where I started, monitor the transcoded bitrate variants at the video head end, put some active testing in. If you then find really, there's additional issues there that you can't track down with that, then engage some of the bigger guns on the passive monitoring probes and really get to the guts of what's going on the wire. But there isn't, we can find out pretty much everything by using that that suite of solutions. So.
I believe this is a quick follow-up on that, Stuart, is what percent of passes versus active do you see in a large-scale scenario typically?
That really varies, Robert, as to whether the customer owns the CDN or not. If you're pushing directly out to a CDN provider, then and you don't have origin servers and you're not responsible for the CDN, you tend to do less passive monitoring unless you've got a really serious issue. We have encountered situations where the active test probes on the downstream side of the CDN said something was wrong. We can't get these bitrate variants, the higher bitrate variants correctly. And the CDN provider has said, nothing wrong my end. And we brought a passive probe in and seen that there's nothing wrong on the publishing part either. And then further investigation has highlighted some configuration issues within the CDN. But this isn't really anyone to blame. It's the great thing about the IT solutions is we take that blame away. Right? You don't want to spend 10 weeks pointing, 2 weeks, pointing the finger of blame at somebody and everybody getting really irate. If you can just put something on the network and say, there's the issue, right? So we take away a lot of that blame. Passive monitoring is something you can bring in to do that. But it's not used as much as the active test probes, and it's not used as much as the head end probes for the QoE and QoS, monitoring the transport streams up at the head end, which can be passive or active, by the way. They can actually use optical taps as well. So
great. Well, we're coming up on the top of the hour here. We still have a few questions. I'm going to keep going if y'all can stay here and keep with us for the Q&A. The next one we had was, has there been any analysis done to estimate any savings from preventing ad fraud in monetizing OTT? And I can say that wasn't part of our analysis. I will say that right after this OTT monitoring study, I also did a study on rotating proxy networks, which can be used for ad fraud. But the better providers out there have very strict know your customer rules that prevent that kind of thing. And then we're also doing a programmatic advertising study right now, so it's something we can look into and happy to talk to you about offline. The next question we had was, how does this scale for the local broadcaster who wants to monitor Hulu, YouTube TV, etc.?
It really depends how much you want to monitor it. So some of these are not adaptive streams, that they're not standard HLS or Dash adaptive solutions that you can just join and get access to. So it really depends whether you can join them. If it's HLS or Dash or some of the new low latency formats, then for HLS and Dash moving forward, we'll be able to join those kind of streams. Some of the Dash variants are need a little bit of work because the Dash variants can vary a lot. So sometimes we need to do a bit of tweaking to access some of the Dash variants, but we haven't found one that we can't deal with yet. But some of the more proprietary standards, I think like YouTube, things like that, you may have challenges monitoring. So, but as long as it's HLS or Dash feed, or even smooth streaming or HDS, the more legacy ones, and you can authenticate and join the stream, then we can monitor it either from a single probe, a portable probe, or from cloud-based probes. And just to answer the other question that's there, Robert, is if the transcode is AWS, do you have an AWS-based probes? Yes, we have probes that we can deploy in AWS to monitor at the transcode point and also at the active testing post-origin and post-CDN. So really, as long as you can join the stream and it's a standards-based stream that we can join, we can access it, and we can do that from appliance-based probes, portable probes, cloud-based probes in AWS, wherever you need to monitor that. And in fact, the number of permutations is just increasing daily at the moment. So.
Any other questions?
One last one here, Robert. I've got one more I'd like to answer if I can. Can I use the OTT post CDN probes to monitor my VOD assets as well as live? Yes, absolutely. As long as HLS or Dash or smooth streaming or HDS and all the ones I talked about before, You can actually set up a probe to monitor live assets and VOD assets if you want to. So it can monitor live assets 24/7. It could cycle around the VOD assets, or you could get it to pull the premium VOD assets on a more regular basis, and then the long tail content, the less valuable VOD assets on a more round robin basis as well. It's very flexible to be able to do that. So the key there is HLS or the legacy smooth streaming or HDS. So.
Great. I think that wraps up the Q&A. As we mentioned before, we'll be happy to take any questions offline. Feel free to email us afterwards, and those that see the video on demand afterwards. We'll put this link up here. For more information on Telestream's OTT monitoring solutions, please go to that link below, telestream.net/IQ. And I'd really like to thank everyone for joining us today on this webinar for OTT monitoring.
Thank you very much.